We're ready. Okay, great. Thanks. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Carpenter. I'm the Michael J. and Amy Rusinko Kakos Dean in the College of Arts and Architecture at the Pennsylvania State University. And welcome to the latest installment of a little project that we call Book Conversation. It is a series of conversations with recently published authors in the College of Arts and Architecture. It started out as an idea in our Department of Art History, and it has just grown to be this spectacular cross-college opportunity to spend some time with leading scholars in their fields who are colleagues of ours here in the college. It's just wonderful. So this evening, I'm sitting here with Taylor Greer, Associate Professor of Music. You're a philosopher, a theorist. Some people might call you a historian if they've dug into this book a bit and other work that you've done. A thinker, an educator, and a brave soul to sit down with me in front of this crowd today. So thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful.
Good. I'm glad. It's a pleasure for me too. So the way this works is Taylor and I are going to have a conversation for a while. I have some prepared questions and other questions emerge. And then I have a series of 5 questions, some rapid fire questions, short answer questions that aren't necessarily about the book. You know some of those questions because I showed those to you ahead of time, but you didn't get all of the questions. So we'll see how well you think on your feet. And then we'll open it up to the crowd. We'll open it up to the audience for their questions. So this evening we're talking about the pastoral in Charles. Now you got to help me with the last name.
Griffiths.
Griffiths.
Yeah.
Because there's an S at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not pronounced in some languages, but we're pronouncing it Griffiths.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Griffiths' music, : That's where the fun part of titles happens, right? You get everybody caught and then you jump into it. Aesthetic of ambivalence.
Yeah.
There are like very few words in that title, and they are each packed with superpowers.
All right, so let me start by saying that his name is a challenge. It's a tricky one. It's originally a Welsh name, so his grandfather came over. He grew up in upstate New York in a place called Elmira. It's about 2-hour drive from here, maybe 2.5 hours, northeast. So central New York. But the story in their family is kind of cute, I don't know, playful, maybe a legend, so maybe it didn't happen. That his great-great-grandfather was in a small town in Wales, was asked to go to the town center and speak his name so that it could be written down. But he had a lisp. He had a speech impediment. So his name was Griffith with a TH. But he was too proud when he said it, and it was misunderstood and written down as Griffiths that he'd never changed it. So that his family name is Griffiths. So anyway, maybe it's not true, but that's kind of colorful. The family said it, so all right. So Griffiths, curious name. And his story is an interesting one, since small town guy, and studied music, kind of late bloomer. But his teacher, his piano teacher, his mentor, was herself very world-traveled. And she said, you cannot stay here. You must go to Germany. If you want to have a musical career, if you want to be trained, you must go to Germany. So, and she had gone there previously. And so he followed her footsteps and went to Berlin, and studied there for about 4 years. And he borrowed the money from her. He didn't have any money. His parents didn't have any money. So she lent him the tuition, stayed there for 4 years, came back, and got a job in New York. In fact, upstate New York, but not quite the same place. But now it's only 20 minutes north of New York City via car. But then it was about an hour by train. Tarrytown, New York, small little place again. And it's a boys' school, Hackley Boys' School. So you got a job in a prep school, okay, to pay the rent. And it was okay. And with that income, he had a bit of a life there, starting about 1904, and lived till 1920. By the way, all the money that she lent him to pay for the schooling in Europe and Germany, he repaid every penny. later when he finally had enough to, right? So that's just a little bit about his personality. All right, fine. So when I say ambivalence in that title, ambivalent, so it's kind of like ambiguous, but ambivalent typically means drawn between two opposites, right? Something that is sort of in between, right? Pulled in different directions. A man of two minds, you might say, right? And that's something about him that's striking, I think. And so why is that? Why do I have that ambivalence in the title? Well, one answer is geographical. He lived in that town. I'll put my hand up here on the map. You can imagine Tarrytown's up here and New York City's down there. And he loved taking the train and going back and forth as often as he could to the big city. He loved it, all right? So he was very much drawn to urban. He rented a flat. He was drawn to the city, and yet his job was in the country, in a small, small town. So he was in transit a lot and even thought of some of his music when he was on the road, thought of one of his biggest pieces, The White Peacock. He thought of the opening tune on the train, on the road. So this man literally lived in transit between this country and this city. So that's one reason why it's ambivalent. So I could go on, but I don't know if you have other questions, but there are other reasons for his ambivalence, but that's the first one. Second one is that really, what is his style? What kind of music did he write? He wrote mostly for piano, solo. He was a pianist, solo piano, but he orchestrated many of those pieces. So they're orchestral tone poems, we say, or symphonic poems, short, intense works for orchestra. And then he wrote songs. So he didn't write opera, he didn't write symphonies, he didn't write lots of the other genres that you might think of during that time period. A lot of vocal and then piano/orchestra. All right, so that's what he wrote. And in this time, now we're talking 1905 to 1920. This is the time when Romanticism, in the big picture, capital R, Romanticism, romantic music, was on the wane. It was sort of the twilight in many respects of Romanticism. Not over, not done, but it was beginning to fall. And what else was on the rise was modernism, new music, new experimental music in all sorts of ways. So he was caught right there in the transition. The torches of modernism were being lit when the embers of Romanticism were slowly dying. He's right there. And he was both. So that's why it's sensible to say he's ambivalent. He's definitely got a foot in both camps, as it were, both traditions. Third, he's not really religious in a traditional way. He pretty much rejected organized religion, yet he set so many spiritual texts. He was really into spirituality and mysticism and curious sorts of things, very interested in spiritualism. So that's curious and a little ambivalent. Also, he was a gay man, so his sexual orientation and in a very heterosexual world. So that's very much a complication that you might describe as ambivalent. So those are some basic ideas of what do you mean by ambivalent. And then I have other things that are a little more, you have to get into the weeds, but it's a good start. So.
That's all I got. No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing. No, seriously, the title, you choose your words very carefully in that title, but also throughout the text. And so I was taken by that. Also taken by just the structure of the book. I mean, you lay it out so well. You set up the context and you say, look, this guy, folks, really, he kind of fell out of the scene, fell out of the picture. You want to make sure people don't forget. You want to make sure that Charles Griffiths is known, is studied, is talked about, is people play his music. What can you tell us a little bit about the rise and fall, or the rise and the absence, and then you're the re-attention, the return to Charles Griffiths. But how did he fall out or fall away from public perception?
It's his story, which is that he was a struggling artist working in a boys' school, so it was a day job, but he really wanted to publish his music and have performances of his music. This is what he lived for, and this was a real challenge at this time. And New York was a great place to pursue those things. Try to get Schirmer, which was one of the biggest music publishers then, and it still is. Schirmer, man, he wanted to have music published by this crew, and they were that is the publisher, they were stingy, and they didn't really like much of it, a little bit, right? So he finally got a break. He got a break, meaning he got published, but his orchestral music was performed by 3 of the biggest orchestras in the country. And it was all in 1919. So basically in 1918, 19, it was the big break. Boston Symphony. The Boston Symphony conductor said, yeah, I love this, great, let's do this White Peacock, whatever the heck that is, and another piece, like, oh, Kubla Khan, whoa, what? Let's premiere your works, and we'll do it in Boston, and you know what, we'll take it on the road to Carnegie Hall, and how about that? How about performing your music in the biggest venue in America, Carnegie Hall, with the Boston Symphony? Then the Philadelphia Orchestra also performed his music. And then a New York group, it's like the New York Phil, it's the precursor to the New York Philharmonic, but it wasn't called that. Still, so the big 3, man, that's huge, right? In 1919, and it was in about 2 months. He went to the Boston premiere, but he started getting sick. So why is that? He's 34 years old. Well, right, it was about the time of Mozart's, and he died at the age of 35. So that's like Mozart, right? And Schubert. Schubert died even earlier. But some of the people we consider to be extraordinary meteors, right? And they passed so fast. He's not quite like Schubert or Mozart, but still, he died young. So there he is in 1919. He's got all these orchestral pieces he wants. But what do you need for an orchestral performance? You need scores for all the instruments. And he didn't have much money to pay the copyists. It was before computers, man. Now you hit a button and you can make scores for the bassoon, for the violin, and all that. We need, yeah, exactly, man. He was AI. He was Charles Griffiths, CG, CG, man. And what could he do is he started paying copyists, and then they would come back with mistakes, drove him nuts. So he just started staying up late at night, pulling all-nighters almost, to get the copying done for the 3 concerts of all the orchestral pieces. And then at one point he was having trouble with this. I see he started wearing a patch and came back to work, keep going, right? So it's kind of dramatic, and because his eyes were tired, and he basically, it was the break of his life, but he was physically broken. And he passed several months later. He didn't go to the New York concerts. He was too sick. They wouldn't let him out of the hospital, et cetera. So it's really sad. So 1920, so you're asking what happened to his story? Well, he was on the rise, and then he died. He passed. So that's really the beginning point. And there were very good reviews. He really had a strong public response, but then, the new piece by X, by Y, by Z in 1922, 24, 26, it passed him by, right? The wheels of change, as it were, of stylistic turmoil, new ideas. The Harlem Renaissance was going on at this time, goodness sakes, and he was not a part of that. This is right after Stravinsky's biggest. The Rite of Spring was 1930. Oh my goodness, Bartok's new music, all this new stuff, Schoenberg, holy moly. And where is he? He's kind of in between. So that's a little bit of and by the way, you were so sweet to say that I'm the one who's really reviving his music. No, I'm standing on the shoulders of somebody. No, there was somebody way bigger than me. Her name is Donna Anderson, and she's passed. But she did so much to promote his work. And so it's thanks to her. I acknowledge her all over the place in my book. So
you do. But you're continuing.
No, yeah.
You are continuing the work. And my computer thinks it's you, because when I type Charles Griffiths.
Really? My name comes up. Okay.
Says see also Taylor Greer.
Okay, so Griffiths Greer. So GG.
GG. There you go.
Cool. All right.
So one of the questions that I asked you, so what do you want me to ask? So is that why you wrote the book? Is to make sure we keep him in mind?
Good question, right?
Why did you write this thing?
All right. So I was very attracted to the world of his music. So the sounds, and it's, you could say, a bit of a blend, a mix. There's some French quality, the sensuality of his music. There's a little bit of German, maybe even some Russian. So it's a bit of a mix in terms of stylistic traditions, right? So that grabbed me and moved me, inspired me, whatever. And I also, because of Donna actually, but anyway, I got a hold of, I was lucky enough to go to an archive and read his diaries. So like any historian, when you can really peek into someone's private records, right? He also wrote letters, but it was more of his diaries. He was extremely devoted diary enterer, man, diary keeper. So you could eavesdrop on his life, because he went home almost every night and wrote. And by that, I didn't just find out about Mr. Griffiths and his struggles, boys' school, New York City, no, my goodness. The man spoke German, read German, French, and Italian, and English, obviously. So he was multilingual and fascinated by literature. And he's basically a window into the culture of the early 20th century in a broad way. So this is post-Victorian, though some people say it's still Victorian. Post-Victorian, never went to England, UK now, but he was influenced by Oscar Wilde in a big way, set by Wilde's poetry. So he's part of that culture of dealing with, right, the complexity of post-Victorian in London. He's also French because he set so much French stuff. So he is a man who has a window into European culture and how that influenced American culture during this period. And that interested me. The historical window of his life and his music that opened out into that time period. So that's historical. I was moved by the history. Then what? Oh, I like looking at music in depth. So I like looking at how it works. That is, under the hood, right? And that has always moved me. So that was really the seed, was to try to figure out how it was organized. But over time, I became extremely interested in the more cultural window that I just described. So those are two reasons. Why did I write the book? The music itself, and then the cultural window that it opened up during that time period.
It's good motivation. And this is a multi-year project. You started this
a long time ago.
a while
It goes
ago.
way back.
Right. But it evolved, so it definitely went through some evolution. And I had no idea at the beginning that it would have led to this at the end. So.
What did you think it was going to be in the beginning?
Yeah, probably a smaller study, maybe a couple of articles.
So by the way, cover, you can see it here. That cover is kind of striking in that one of my colleagues helped me create this. I don't have the graphic skills, but it is drawn from an actual image by a gentleman named Whistler, James Whistler. He has a lot of names, but it's basically Whistler. His most famous work is Whistler's Mother, which is not that great a work. Sorry, sorry, Mr. Jeez, he wrote so many. Claude Debussy loved his stuff. Whistler was a big artist in the early 1900s. Oscar Wilde knew him and they fought each other and jealous, et cetera. So 1890s, 1900s. And this is drawn from a wall, actually. This is an image from a wall painting, like a mosaic or something, but not a mural, sorry, not a mosaic, from the Peacock Room. Okay, what? The Peacock Room? Yes, he redecorated a very wealthy British man's dining room and painted on the wall. And okay, cool. And then that guy died and they had fights and whatever. And then someone bought it and moved it to Detroit, moved the whole room to Detroit. That guy died and sold it to the Smithsonian. This is sitting in DC now. This Peacock Room is in a gallery right next to the Air and Space Museum. Right, it's one of the big galleries on the mall, in Washington Mall. So the Peacock Room, and
Like in the castle?
Right next to it. No. There's so many Smithsonian. But it's right next door.
Nice. Uh-huh.
It's underground. But anyway, so
what's this peacock? Well, Griffiths wrote a piece called The White Peacock. So when I said the window of culture, the cultural portrait of all these different things, what is the White Peacock? It's the name of a piano work that was orchestrated. But actually, no, it's the name of a poem. So this is where the interdisciplinary aspect of my project has come into play and then has come to life. So I didn't know that when I started, but the White Peacock isn't just a name that Griffiths invented. In fact, it's based on a poem. And that poem is by William Sharp, not a very famous name, but Sharp, okay, Scot who lived in London, Scottish. And that, a poem about a bird in a garden. White bird, so albino, but a white bird in a garden. And that was inspired by a pastel that was in a gallery in London. So now we're back to London, all right? London, and it's a pastel, and that pastel, it's a white image of a woman wearing a costume, but white, okay? And that pastel, so that visual art, is based on a play that was in Wimbledon, England, right outside of London, by Dubainville, so another Frenchie, and that is 4 dimensions. So we're talking drama that led to, painting that led to poetry that led to music. So that's 4 different layers. It's a kind of genealogy of interesting new artwork during that period. And I thought, well, we got to put that on the cover. So he didn't really love James Whistler's stuff particularly, but I thought the White Peacock is one of his biggest pieces. So that's why I put it on the cover. All right, that was a long-winded story.
It is, and I'm glad you told that story, and because I wanted to talk about the cover,
Yeah.
and the white peacock, because of all of the 12, assessments and discussions and works that you interpret, analyze. I said, I can't. First of all, you have excerpts of the scores in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't read music. I can barely read English. So I needed to listen to it.
Right.
So I said, which one am I going to listen to? I can't listen to all. So I went to the National Archives and I found the YouTube video of someone playing the white peacock.
Okay.
And I'm going, oh my goodness. I'm just watching and listening, and I'm doing this up until the end, and she's playing, and then there's this last note, and her hand just doesn't really leave the keys, but it does. It's just a lovely piece. And then to know, this came from this, came from this, came from this. There's nothing to get excited about. I'm joking. Like if you're talking about interdisciplinary work, we talk about interdisciplinary research, the passion, the excitement in just this story is reason enough to pursue interdisciplinary work. It really is. So that, it makes perfect sense to put the white peacock on the cover.
Yeah, well, we could go back and talk a little about the pastoral, since that's another word.
Yeah, let's do that. Yes, it is.
So when you say pastoral,
one of those well-chosen words in the title.
Yeah.
What do you mean by pastoral? And I guess the next question would be, what's the pastoral? Okay, I'll respond to that. But then I want to also have a double question, which is, well, that's the pastoral back in the early 20th century, 1905, 1910, 15, right in there, till 1920. So first 20 years that was 100 years ago. Why should we be interested in pastorals today, right? Is it a dying art form? Is it an art form that's still alive, or is it dwindling, dead? Maybe, do people really care about pastoral things anymore? Pastoral themes, elements, whether they're literature, whether they're music, visual arts, etc. So that would be the second half. So, all right. So first half, what's a pastoral? Well, it's a very rich subject, and this is not a lecture. This is not. Do not worry, I won't get too carried away. But it comes from ancient Greece, all right? At least our tradition. There could very well be older pastoral traditions in different regions of the world, as in the East. But in terms of the West, you go back to ancient Greece and Rome, and there were pastorals that were sung, but certainly written down, all right? And so that's the seed. And they were definitely literary, and that would blend with music because we associate pastoral with shepherds, right? With their herds people, herdsmen, taking care of sheep outdoors, right? And maybe playing a flute, or maybe a aulos, but that would be like an oboe, or maybe a pan flute, or very simple pastoral instruments, right? And so it's music, but right? It's stories about shepherds. That's what you think of the pastoral in the old days, and that is ancient Greece and Rome. Over time, then, we're talking some names. Virgil wrote, ancient Roman now. He didn't talk about pastorals in the present. He talked about imaginary pastorals, ideals. So they weren't places, they were in Arcadia. They were in imaginary and cool places. Or maybe there were gods still floating around still. So wonderful imaginary places, right? That's the ancient Greek tradition. Now what? It was revived later, like as in the Renaissance and in the early Baroque, revived by opera, by music, so that you could find later pastoral themed with stories, right? Or with songs, so texts. And then that led to instrumental traditions where there weren't really texts, but the pastoral continued for quite some time. All right. So I would say that, is the pastoral still alive? Well, it certainly was revived and transformed slowly in the 19th and the 20th century. But now let's talk today. All right, hike. I looked up 2022, one film. I looked up two things, but I looked up before this. I thought, let me try to see. I looked up one. It's a book that turned into a movie. It's called The Lord of the Rings. Has anyone ever heard of that? It's J.R.R. Tolkien, an Englishman, a Brit. And he wrote this book in the late 40s, 50s, post-World War II. But anyway, so it's already 70 years old. But then it was made into a film. Maybe most of you know about this film or have seen it. About 2001, 2002, That was when it was filmed, all New Zealand. All right, then what? Well, that's 22 years old, 23 years old. It was re-released on Prime Video. I looked this up, man. On Prime Video. Okay, so Amazon, cool, you right? One day, in 24 hours, 20 million people downloaded it and watched it. All right, so that's one film, 20 million. Over 3 months, 100 million. All right, so is that only a pastoral? Well, no, it's a really wonderful story, a very complicated story, and it's about a ring. Lord of the Rings, definitely about the power of this gold ring, but actually it's about power. And what are we going to do? And it's quest. It's a story about quest. We need to get, and along the way, all these people come together, and they're dwarves and they're elves, multiple races and traditions and humans. And then they stop. Well, they start in the Shire, and the Shire is very pastoral. Small town, villages, it's a total pastoral Eden, as it were. And they leave there to go on their journey, on their quest. And along the way, they go to the elves, where the elves live, particularly Lothlorien. Lothlorien is this incredible pastoral vision. So there are at least two huge pastoral moments in The Lord of the Rings. Now, is that the reason you'd watch it? No, probably you'd watch it for the romance and for the battles and all the cool things in The Lord of the Rings. But it's pastoral. Sorry, there's major pastoral aspects that you maybe didn't know you were going to get that when you bought it and downloaded it and watched it. But I don't think the pastoral is fading. If The Lord of the Rings was that popular 3 years ago, 2 years ago, how's that?
That's good. So we should care in this century about pastorals in the same way that we cared about them before? Why do we care about them now?
That's a good question.
So it's about the city versus country, so rural versus urban. But there are other things. So that it'd be typical to the standard kind of, the standard definition of pastoral would be that it is removed from the urban, and it is therefore a rural retreat, an Arcadia, imaginary or real. So a respite, a place where you can recover, right, and be away from the city. That's a kind of a traditional. And originally, yes, it was that. But over time, things have evolved, and there's a tension there between city, country, and tranquility, serenity, quiet, and urban bustle and controversy or whatever. But that it's not necessarily completely split, that there's a way that those two could be involved more, put it that way. And so in other words, Griffiths wrote music about gardens. The White Peacock actually is about a garden, a bird in a garden. It doesn't say that in the title, but it's about a garden. So he loved gardens, but ones that sometimes had troubles. They weren't just ideal. Kubla Khan is one of his pieces. It's based on a poem by William Wordsworth, right? A Brit, 1790 and 1800. So he was reviving a very old poem. And that poem is not only about the beauty of an imaginary Chinese garden. It existed, but it was an imagined place based on a real place. But that garden is confusing, and there's some trouble in that garden. So he set that poem of sorts. It's for orchestra, and it's not just a perfect Eden, as it were. It's a garden with controversy, with challenges, with threats, with menace, balanced with serenity. So I would say that's part of what's striking and new about his vision of the pastoral. It's a mixed vision. It's not just all sweet and peaches and cream.
Yeah. As you're responding to that question, and I'm thinking about the tensions, about the aesthetic of ambivalence. The contradiction, I love the vision of him on this train, right? Yeah. And so his train is I have to metaphorize and make puns, his train of thought, right? Going from one extreme to the other, from one site and location and existence to the other. There are tensions, there are conversations that happen, right? And as we layer that early 20th century sense of the pastoral, and we bring it into the 21st, and we think about, so what does it mean? I'm thinking about, if I dare go here, the garden of society, the garden of culture, the garden of contemporary existence, at least in this country, there's some tension going on in the garden. There's some contradiction, there's some controversy, there's an aesthetic of ambivalence, if you will. Or am I just finding a way to just
Yeah,
reference
this is
something that we're
true.
all thinking but not saying right now.
Yeah, it's a challenging time, absolutely. And so I had no idea when I finished this book. It was published last May, by the way. So that's 7 months ago. But it was for the last year, the wheels were turning in the publication process. So revisions and things like that. Mostly not me changing sentences, but it took a while.
Sure.
Right. Okay. During
Just
that
the
time,
little
I
tinkers,
would have
yeah.
no idea that
Yeah.
it would have come out at this moment in American history. So it's definitely it's a challenging time, particularly because we're told about the striking differences between urban and rural. You know, and we're told that because there's demography. People kept track, not only who voted for whom in a given election, but just in the lives that Americans have been leading. Put it that way. Not only the political choices they make. There is definitely a rural-urban split and division.
So could one find a similar kind of conversation or mapping of his work in the early part of the 20th century on the social and cultural landscape in the same way that we're essentially talking about it now?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Is that your next book?
Yeah, I don't know. No, I don't think so. Too hard, too complicated. But yeah, how do you try to use an early 20th century lens that is a way of understanding culture then? And I don't understand all of culture. Goodness, that's a pretty big claim. But the window into which this set of pieces by one American composer and what that helps us understand about the day, those 20 years. But then how that might help us understand the present tense in the last 20 years of our country or, you know, the world. That's tough. That's challenging. There's a lot of stuff planned. But I do have other projects.
Well, why don't you tell us about those?
If that's what you're interested in.
I was working on that next line here on my little piece of paper.
Right,
yeah, go ahead. What are you working on next, Taylor?
I think I dodged a bullet. I've got a real interest in a singer-songwriter, and that's personal because I'm not the same age as you. I think I'm older than you are. I got more gray hair. And that is, I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, man. I listened to a woman named Joni Mitchell, okay? Listened to her records. Never heard her live. She didn't come to the town where I grew up, the city where I grew up. But I listened to her music, and among others, composers of the day. And then I went on my way, kind of forgot about her for many years. But then I've rediscovered her lately. Now, she has gone through a renaissance. She's gotten an enormous amount of attention in the last 4 or 5 years. She had some serious illnesses. She's recovered a bit. But she's getting up there in age, and yet she's still kicking, and very strong creative voice, put it that way, for such a long time. And I've become really interested in her early music. And her early music is, she cut an album every year for about 5 years, 68, 69, 70, right in there, in that period. And her first album was called Song to a Seagull. Okay, that's the name of it. And then a few other albums. But regardless of the names of the albums or of the melodies, the songs, she was a poet. She's a songwriter, writes the lyrics, and then invents the songs herself all together. And a lot of the people in this time period, they were not doing this, right? The Judy Collinses, the Joan Baez's, these are wonderful singers, but they didn't write their own stuff. They sang her stuff, right? So she had both the poetic and the musical gift, and then she blended them in really striking ways. And I discovered that some of her early works were never released on albums. And she composed them, she wrote the lyrics, but she never released them.
They were recorded, but not
But
released.
They were recorded live. And you could find those because she released a set of CDs, quite a few, a 5 CD set that is not an archive. You don't have to go to Detroit. She lived there for a while, or New York, or whatever, in LA. It's a public archive in some sense, a record of live performances of her singing. And so there's no score, but I've listened to, there's about 30 tunes at least, and there's a number of them that really interested me. So I'm immersed in those pieces, those songs, and then I'm comparing them to the actual release songs in a few of the early albums. So this is early Mitchell, early song. And what am I looking at? She's singing a lot of laments for me. They're a very strong element of lament, and that's been part of this book too. Pastoral, and there's a lament aspect too.
Yeah.
So I'm really into early Joni, and I definitely would love to. I'd love to meet her. God, maybe I could pull that off. Do you know her?
No,
Maybe
but
you can arrange it.
but I'm fearless with sending emails to people.
Well,
So
yeah, you've got a little more status than I do, man. Like, maybe you can help me out here.
I would love to collaborate with you on this
Or
project.
maybe you know somebody who knows somebody.
Let's see if we can figure it
All
out.
right, very good.
The you mentioned. I'm just thinking about this Joni Mitchell. I mean, you've mentioned a bird, seagull. Yeah. So we already have the cover.
That's true. She's also an artist. She painted the album covers for several of her albums. So she's an artist. You could put her stuff on the cover.
That's the question I put in
We'd
the
have to
email.
Get permission.
See, listen, Taylor's writing this book about your work. We need a cover image. Can we use one of your drawings?
Yeah, your paintings. Yeah.
Your paintings.
Right. Okay. All right.
Early Joni, colon.
Early Joni.
And then you have to...
Then we have to have a post-colon.
Aesthetic of something.
Yeah, aesthetic of something.
Listen, you just mentioned lament, right? And pastoral. And part of what you do in this book is reimagine the way people were looking at Griffiths, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a particular lens that folks were looking at, and you say, well, the work he was doing actually, you had to create a new framework for folks. Have you gotten any responses about what you did from people?
Well, it's a little early. I mean, the wheels of reviews, book reviews.
Oh, right, just came out. Yeah. That's right. Mm-hmm.
So no one's, but I'm sure there'll be some, how could you possibly have, there'll be some pushback a bit. Or mixed reviews. Many of them probably be, well, it's really not, I like the cover, but you've made some assumptions, on page 32, and that footnote, I'm sure there will be mixed reviews.
Well, there probably will be. Like, what's a review if it's not mixed?
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
But how drastic, in your unbiased perspective, how drastic a shift are you offering the field by saying, we have to reimagine, we have to look at his work a little differently than we have before? Is this like, oh, forget it, that Greer guy's crazy? Or, you know what? This is really helpful.
No, that's interesting question. Because at the end, the last chapter, I definitely try to address, I finished this study of the collection of music written by one kind of unsung American artist, unsung composer, in that I don't know how much of his music is being performed today. The School of Music, by the way, just did some, so it was very nice in the fall. Highlighted him in a wonderful faculty concert. But anyway, so yeah, what is really new about my approach? Well, that takes a little time to set it up, but there's a little philosophy in there, and it kind of gets complicated. But I would hope that the way I create a sense of pastoral for this particular individual and his time period, I would argue, and I would propose that could be reinvented for other composers. And so I would say this, it's a joke, but I tailor make it for this composer, literally. It's by me, but as well as tailor-made, that is an expression, meaning it's particularized, it's unique, it's designed for this particular instance.
Bespoke, if you will.
Yeah, so it's tailor-made in a double sense.
Yeah.
Well, I would think you could tailor-make it, or Stephen make it, or whatever. That is whoever the person is doing it for another composer. And using some of the approaches, the assumptions that I make, but also establishing it in the historical moment of the given artist, composer. So that would be one possible way that the book could influence somebody.
Yeah, I love that response. And I mentioned it early on, I love how you've structured the book. I mean, it reads like a well-crafted study. You walk us through, here's the context, and here's the methodology, and you're bringing in this artist and this philosopher and these other philosophers. You're bringing all these folks, and they say, okay, here's how we're going, and we're going to divide and work through these lenses, and then now here are these 12 works, and I'm going to walk you through each of these 12 works, and then I'm going to wrap it up. It's really a well-crafted, well-structured text. I appreciated it on that level as much as I appreciated just all the places that you took us and the ways that I struggle sometimes with, all right, this piece of music is inspired by this painting, and this is what I see. Well, how do you make that translation from something visual to something that is in music? I mean, this is that's a shift that not everybody can make, and you're helping folks understand how he's doing that work.
Oh, thank you. Could I hire you as my agent? This sounds, geez. Anyway, yeah, sure.
Good stuff. No, it really is. One last thing. I want to reference one thing specifically that in the text. Then I have 5 questions, and then we're going to open it up to these very patient, adoring fans of yours out here. So a few times this afternoon, you've used the reference of window, right? It's a window or a lens. But I'm going back to that footnote. We've been joking about footnote number 75. But here on chapter 2, so in chapter 2, you know when you set up your methodology, and then that sets up the analysis in chapter 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you say interpreting his various pastoral cues is like looking through a musical kaleidoscope. I love that. Mm-hmm. I could go on. The whole paragraph is beautiful, but a musical kaleidoscope. Some colors occur more often, other colors less often. In the pages that follow, that's standard. You have to use that phrase, or it's not a scholarly work, right? In the pages that follow, my goal is to show that in each of the 12 works under consideration, the pastoral cues interact with one another, sometimes in cooperation, sometimes in conflict. I love it. That's such a well-presented direction for the reader to take in a challenging text to write, to research, and to read. It's just brilliant. Not to read because I just said it was clear the way you said it. It's just so layered and thick and references this, that, and the other. But that statement there, you gave any reader a direction to follow, whether they're a musician, a historian, or a dean who's just happy to chat with really brilliant people. So,
well, you're very sweet. No, that's great.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ready for these 5 questions, man?
Yeah. All right. Now, okay, here we go.
Some of these questions you've seen before. Some of them you've not. All right.
It's like a game show.
It is. And now, Taylor, here are your 5 questions. What is your favorite word?
Yeah, okay. He did give this to me ahead of time. So I've thought about this. So I've been a bit of a rebel here since to choose one favorite. This reminds me of people who come, oh, Taylor, you're a music person. Can you tell me your favorite composer, right? And my typical answer to that is I can't give you one because it changes fairly often. And if I gave you, and I said that, I just love X's music. Oh, amazing. It might change tomorrow, it might change next week. And I teach a lot of different kinds of pieces and different composers. So for me to choose one word over another, or like, what is my least favorite word? What word do I hate? You know, like,
That's the next question.
I knew, right? So either of those two to have preference, such a strong preference. So what's my favorite word? You know, like, I don't know. So boy, oh boy.
Should we come back to that?
No. I have a propensity to avoid your question.
Okay.
Because it has too much density. So I'll tell you that. I love rhymes and I love puns. So, but I'm certainly not a poet, but I spent a long time thinking about how to write some of those sentences. So what was my favorite word? Well, today I guess I'll just say.
What is a favorite word, not the favorite word?
All right,
How's that?
okay, that'll help me.
That gets you off one hook and puts you on a
right.
different one.
I'll say peacock. Then.
Peacock, good. And a least favorite word, a word of lesser affinity for you.
Holy moly. Okay.
Questions get harder, Taylor.
Yeah, really. Oh, killing me. Bland. Oh, yes. How's
Bland.
that?
I like that.
Bland. It's my least favorite.
I'm with you.
Okay, how's
okay,
that?
That's good.
God.
3. Question
Man.
3. What is a place in the world you'd want to visit but haven't yet visited?
Oh, wow. Oh, man. Japan or China. Huge. Or Korea. Somewhere. Yes. Somewhere in that world. I mean, China's complicated because of the politics, but no, the Chinese tradition is extraordinary. So if I could go there without any, right? Or Japan, Korea, one of those 3.
Okay, that works. So I might already know the answer to this. but then you're going to complicate it because you're going to push back on the question. So,
Go ahead.
what is your desert island album?
Oh, okay. Again, favorite album.
Well, no,
Jeez.
I didn't say favorite.
I know, same.
If you can only have one.
Jeez. Man, guys, put me on the spot.
Islands typically have seagulls.
Okay. All right, boy. I should have predicted this was going to happen. Jeez. All right, I'll just put I'll put a Joni Mitchell album. How's that? Is that good? Okay. Joni Mitchell.
His answer is a Joni Mitchell album, not without any more specificity.
Okay, well, blue's a good one.
No, it's fine.
Blue.
It's fine.
Like
I'm taking
cool.
them all with me. All right, here's the last of the 5. If you were not a music theorist or a faculty member in the School of Music, what profession would you have?
So it was tough. He gave me this ahead of time. It would either be a writer or an actor. But what I know about either one, I know a little bit more about writing. But when I say writing, it would be an ideal, whatever, fantasy that I could write and be happy, content. And it would be fiction, not only nonfiction. So, but boy, that's a big ask since I don't have, right? Whereas acting, I don't know anything about it, but it would be something that I'd be attracted to, put it that way. So.
Okay. It's on your list of next projects.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Taylor.
All right.
All right. Let's open it up
I
to the group.
survived.
You did.
Oh my
Well
God.
done. All right. Let's take a few questions and then we can have refreshments and conversation.
I got one for you. I'm curious about process. You're such a big project. We've got people in the room working on pieces. Was there a moment in writing this book where you changed your mind about something, where you had a new idea and you had to rearrange how you approached it?
Yes. But can I give you specifics? Because it would be, I'd really have to, because I did start, I'll try to give you a little bit of background story. I did start looking at the organization of his music. So that would be a traditional approach of interpretation to look at it deeply at a work of art. In this case, let's say a tone poem like The White Peacock, right? Piano piece turned into an orchestral piece. So I started by looking in depth at that work. It's about 7 minutes long, 11-page score. I listened to recordings. I played through the piano a lot. I sang some of it. So I really internalized the sound world. Then I also read the poem to which it refers. It was only excerpted at the beginning of the score. Then I looked at the whole poem. I looked at all the poems of this guy. His name is William Sharp. Read as much as I could about the writer and how much that might have. So I immersed myself in the composer. I immersed myself in his sources of literary inspiration. Read the diaries of the composer. All right. But I was really looking at structure, right, and how the artwork works, right, I would say. And that was my point of departure when I started this, way back. But over time, I became just as interested in other things. And to do so, I had to train myself. I had to do a lot of reading. And so a little bit of philosophy, you mentioned that word. I mean, that's a big word. What do you mean by that? Well, assumptions that you bring to interpreting art, that's part of it. And what do you mean by pastoral? I looked in the theories of the pastoral deeply, and I didn't know that at the beginning at all. So that would be one way that I shifted and expanded my focus, and it slowed me down. I had to go start all over. Oh my goodness, geez. So that was a little bit of help. But did I really shift? That is completely shift. I didn't have this ambivalent idea at the beginning because I didn't know that much about it. And the ambivalence thing came up later. So if that helps. Yeah, but that was a good question. Yeah.
I have a related one. How did the process of writing and your research change your relationship to his music?
Well, anytime that that's a really good question. Anytime that you respond to an artwork, really any artwork, but in this case, music and sometimes literature connected, much of the response is not verbal. It is a deep response to this art, to an artwork. And then when you come to the task, when you appoint yourself the task of, I need to write down, I need to bring this into some form that is, linguistic, and I want to try to interpret it, explain it, right? Defend it, propose something new about it. That not only is it going to be my experience of if I like it or I don't like it, but what about the age? What about the time period? Is there something I can interpret about this time period? So when you start writing that down, it totally changes. The opening gesture, if I had a piano, I'd sit down and play it. So opening gesture is it's two voices, and then there's this chord, and it just sits there. So it's melodic, and it's chordal, and it is held there, and it's kind of out of time. It's sort of floating a bit. So it's in time, and then it's out of time. So already it's reflective. It's kind of meditative right away. And I knew that from the first start, from the very, very beginning, and I liked that about it. But then I absorbed that and thought more. I don't know if this is a long-winded answer, but by trying to write that down, it changes it a little bit to say that it's meditative, that it's what I just said to you. But I intuited that right away when I heard the piece the second or third time. So when you bring things to language, it changes your response, I would say. And it enriches, but anyway, hope that helped. Great.
Yeah, Laura.
I was wondering if exoticism is a theme that you trace as well. If I'm not mistaken, the Peacock Room is kind of a Japanese influenced room in DC, now in DC. So does that show up in the music as well, some of the Eastern influences of Japanese music or Far East Asia?
Yeah, so the word exoticism is that is the tradition of studying late 19th and early 20th century, but it's like all the 19th century, of studying how European art in general, so visual arts, literature, and music, how they were inspired by non-Western music, and in particular, East Asian music traditions. This is used to be called exoticism, and now that word has been reevaluated because of political assumptions about culture and about our culture versus Western culture versus non-Western culture. So I use the term totally, but I have major footnotes in trying to show that I don't assume some of the same things that early 20th century authors were assuming. But Griffiths was just in love with anything new, particularly from India, what he knew of it, Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, so Saudi Arabia now, but Arabic music, because he found out about it by reading it in books and then hearing Arabic musicians come through New York, and then Indian music, and then Japanese music, and then Chinese music, Chinese theater. He heard New York was a crossroads of non-Western music. And he was fascinated by a lot of it. So how much of that actually made it into his music? Did he quote this folk tune, this Chinese? Yes, he did. He wrote a set of 5 songs, and that one of which is very much based on a Chinese folk. But the other 4 of this set, so it's a song cycle, so a set of 5 songs, they're like Chinese music. So he's inspired by it, but he's not setting a pre-existing folk melody, put it that way. So that means he's kind of in the shadows of non-Western traditions, but very much inspired by it. They're for piano and voice, so the piano is not a Chinese instrument. It's not an Eastern, that is an original instrument at all, but he's trying to capture some of those qualities of sound in his voicings and in his orchestral pieces as well. So in short, he was inspired by it, but he was quite happy to adapt it to Western instruments and in his own Western style, I would say. So in one of the reviews, they may very well say, oh my goodness, why aren't you focusing more on this cultural appropriation of non-Western music? And my answer to that, if someone were to bring that subject up, the word appropriation, which really means stealing. And I say to that, well, I think that's an unfair charge, as it were, an unfair observation to be made. But yes, he certainly was part of a culture that was importing non-Western traditions. Absolutely. And in New York, yeah, that's where he was exposed to it. But did he do it for his own profit, to make money off of Japanese melodies or Chinese traditions that he was inspired by? This is part of a rich, complex world when you say what is inspiring to an artist. And I think he wanted to make great new music and music that meant something deeply to him. So yes, part of it is appropriation in bringing that music and then bringing it to a Western audience. But it's tricky. I mean, in this day and age, it's definitely tricky. But so exoticism, he was very inspired by it. Yes, in loosely understood, non-Western sources, both musical as well as literary, as well as artists, authors who traveled to the East Asia and then came back and had their stories or fantasies of that world. He was inspired by those travel logs. Very much. He read them all, tons, because he kept a list in his diaries of all the books that he read, and I followed and read most of those books. So I know his musical taste, I know his literary taste, and he was very inspired by things about non-Western culture from a Western point of view, and then sometimes from a non-Western point of view. So that's his story. Good question. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
So, so I come from a very different tradition, so more like a social scientist. So I have two questions. One is the process and one is the content. So when we do work, it's, I think, easier, kind of, because I collect information and I interpret it, analyze it. But then often when you're done with it because you're not getting, say, any more new stuff. And then we have things like we actually take it back to the people and see what do they think of it. So there is an external way of saying, and then you say, yeah, I'm now at a place where I know enough about this thing, and the people I'm working with are also kind of, they agree. But when you're doing historical work, you don't have that. You can't ask so-and-so. So how do you kind of, when you're writing or when you're doing that, okay, it's ready now. How does that work?
That's a profound question. When's it done? And when do you arrive at a conviction, I guess, if you could call it that, a deep confidence that what you're reporting, whatever, my interpretation is done, but does it really reflect what I have discovered and written down, and would it change tomorrow or next year or in 10 years? That's tricky. I mean, it also depends on your personality. Are you a person who writes and then, okay, I'm done? Or are you a person who, I'm gonna, no, actually, are you a perfectionist? And I'm the latter. So it's hard for me to let something go and to say it's done. But, the best thing is when you have a book contract and they say, the deadline is May, whatever. It was January, but the deadline is the deadline. So but your point is about when is the interpretation done? Good question. Yeah, if I were to start all over again, maybe the next round, that is my next journey through this music and trying to record my interpretations would be different. But that's all I got based on the time that I spent on it. But anyway, good question. What was your second question?
It was about the pastoral. So my work is urban, so I don't work on the pastoral. So one thing I often find with the pastoral, it's like you said, it's often in juxtaposition to the urban. But I think, at least I feel, that it hides some things. It's a romanticized, nostalgic feeling of this pastoral because in many layers, who can afford the pastoral? Like the English landscapes or whatever, who lived there? Who had those? They're not the serfs or the other people who are tending and keeping the pastoral, as it were. And there are also a lot of hierarchies embedded everywhere, whether it be urban or pastoral. So when you are interpreting it, and actually people say in the urban areas is where there's more, at least used to be, I don't know, now we live in very segregated societies. You brush shoulders with people not like you, whether it be, racially, socially, all other kinds. The mixing happens in the urban areas. So did any of this come up with when you were looking at this pastoral? And here was this person who was moving between the two. So I'm thinking, being a musician, a sensitive person, you would be seeing this a lot. I'm imagining, because I have no idea, like New York City, you know, bustling, but also tenement, this, that, all those other things. But is the pastoral, like he was in a, what you said, a school. It was definitely
The boys'
not
school.
the pastoral in a mansion somewhere, or, you know, the differences. Did that come up in how he saw it, and was it reflected? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I see. Well, you've several layers there in that comment and question. I don't think he would have been attentive to and then given voice to tenement housing in a big city like New York or Philly or Boston. He definitely lived in more of the nostalgia that you just described. And that leads us to the question of what do you mean by the pastoral? Does it always have to be this idealized? And there's been some pushback, sort of anti-pastorals that would kind of question the social standing of these idealized places, like who's doing the work on the farm, who's doing the work in the country. And it's not always sweet, like not only serfs, no, but even farmers now. Like what is this idealized country we're talking about in real terms, in terms of social class, in terms of who the work done, and then labor. Yes, those are not the things that he was thinking about. But more recently, there was some pastoral. There have been pushbacks about art that might be generated by a little bit more materialistic, if you want to say, rather than living in the world of ideas. And the ideals are very much a nostalgia about an imagined past. That's what Virgil's all about. That's ancient Rome. He's already nostalgizing about something that doesn't exist in Rome. So that's a tradition of the pastoral, is to dream about something that is not here and now. And I'm arguing that it was a continuing tradition of nostalgia. Yes. Now, is that a problem? Well, this is part of who he is. So, and if you find that, like, well, gosh, what about the people that he's ignoring? Well, he was an artist in 1880 to 1920, 1885, 1920. So, musician, but very interested in literature. So, and I read almost all the books he did, or at least about him. So I know what his tastes were, his literary tastes, and he was extremely interested in literature, and wrote down opinions and then set things, and included excerpts of the literature, excerpts of poems in his music. So not only as lyrics of songs. So he was well read, but a man of culture. He took it all very seriously. And so when I say pastoral, it is a literary and musical hybrid, or a blend. And it is not so much focused on the material of who's living in the country and who's doing the work, and et cetera. So does that kind of respond a little bit to you? But it was good. You poked in a different direction. It was very nice.
Good questions. All right. Taylor, you survived that round too.
All right.
Well done. Taylor Greer, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. All right, great.